Good evening. I'm Derek Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard, and you're watching The Pipeline. Today is January 4th, 2023. It's a new year. It normally takes me a week of getting this, like put the wrong date on everything. I haven't gotten it wrong once this year.
You're just inviting it now.
Yeah, I've jinxed myself. I'm going to mess it up now, probably on some important documents. Thank you all for joining us. Very pleased we could have you here in the new year. I'm joined as usual by the Western Standard's opinion editor, Nigel Hannaford. Welcome, Nigel.
Nice to be here again.
Have a good break?
Wonderful. I was exhausted. But I'm back.
That's good.
As Mr. Trudeau said.
I needed a break, the other one, yeah. I needed a break too, but by the time I came back, I was ready to work. I needed to dig back into it. Also joined by the Western Standard's senior Alberta columnist, Cory Morgan. Cory, you have a good Christmas?
I did.
Yeah.
Pretty subdued, but I saw the kids. I didn't get in trouble. It was as good as we can expect out of me.
See, family Christmas is much more interesting when you drink.
Yeah, there's always more memorable stories, but
Yeah.
they aren't necessarily good ones.
No, they're not. Not normally. All right, well, we got a good show today. Don't spy on the government. It doesn't like competition. John Carpe, president of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, has been arrested and charged with obstruction of justice for doing what the justice system and the government in general does quite regularly, which is spy on us. And he's been charged because he had some private investigator look into a judge, seeing if this judge was violating the government's COVID rules during lockdowns and whatnot. And an inadvisable thing, but apparently now criminal. News to many of us. Arrested over Christmas. They've had well over a year to do it, and they decided to pick him up during Christmas. Quite alarming stuff that we're going to dig into. As well, the government has ordered that Jordan Peterson, this hateful, scary man, submit himself to sensitivity or social media training, or else he could have his license to practice clinical psychology in Ontario pulled because he's dangerous. He has hurt people's feelings, and words are violence now in 2022. Bizarre stuff that we're going to look into. As well, the Supreme Court of Texas. Very surprised hearing this coming from a court in Texas. But the Supreme Court of Texas has awarded sole custody to a mother, clearing the way for this mother to chemically castrate her 7-year-old boy. I almost said 17, because even that would be preposterous. But a 7-year-old boy now has the way clear to be chemically castrated by his mother because he likes Elsa in Frozen. So, shocked to hear coming from Texas, but what happens south of the border inevitably ends up coming north of the border. Before we dive into it, though, we're going to tell you about my favorite sponsor, the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. I'm going to tell you today, I've been a member of the Canadian Shooting Sports Association for more than a decade, long before they were sponsored here of the Western Standard, because I trust them as Canada's leading firearms rights organization to protect my right to own, bear, use, and purchase firearms safely and legally in this country. These are rights that are under mortal attack in Canada right now. The federal government is already banned your right to buy or sell your handgun to anyone but the government to hand it in. The federal government is got a bill right now that's going to ban even basic, simple, otherwise nonchalant hunting rifles. And of course, they've already long since banned guns that look scary but are just standard, otherwise sport shooting or hunting rifles. Gun rights have never been under more severe, sustained attack in Canada as they are right now. And it is the Canadian Shooting Sports Association that is standing athwart the federal government's attempts to take your guns away. That's why you need to be a member of the CSSA right now. Don't freeload. You need to be a part of the movement standing up for your gun rights in Canada. Please go to CSSA-CILA.org or just Google them, as I do when I'm going to their site, and join up and become a member. It's cheap and it's worth every single penny. Gun owners need to stand together if there's going to be anything left for us to be able to shoot in this country. Oh, you know what? I couldn't help it. over Christmas, I always watch The Lord of the Rings over Christmas. And so it's a Christmas movie to me because it came out at Christmas when I was a teenager. And I was watching that scene where Bilbo is thinking about keeping the ring. He says, why shouldn't I keep it? And it's become a great meme. And then it just struck me that, like, just exchange the ring for a gun. Why shouldn't I keep it? Okay, so let's get down to business. Don't spy on the government because they don't like competition. So in July 2021, John Carpe, he's the president of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. Just for those of you who haven't been following along the last few years, this has been the leading organization in Canada launching court challenges, normally on constitutional grounds, against federal and provincial governments and municipal governments' restrictions on freedoms related to all things COVID. So lockdowns, vaccine mandates, discriminating against the unvaccinated for things like organ transplants, all sorts of things. They've been launching these things. And in July 2021, there was a court case going on in Manitoba. And the JCCF was leading this year. And the Chief Justice, Glenn Joyal, if I'm pronouncing that right, had a tail put on him, a PI hired by the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. That's an unusual thing to put a PI on a judge, and not something I would recommend doing, but hardly something I think that would be illegal. John Carpe has been dealing with the Law Society Manitoba for it. John Carpe is a lawyer. He faces potential
disbarment, I guess.
At the most extreme, disbarment, but definitely faces legal sanction from the Law Society. I don't know, justified or not, but the JCCF apologized, said, yeah, kind of went over the line, and they've put in place better internal governance to make sure that kind of thing doesn't happen again. Okay. Whatever, but if, it's one thing for a lawyer to do it, but I have a hard time feeling that if you or I or Corey put a PI on a judge who's overseeing a case about lockdowns, COVID restrictions, and we were potentially able to find that the judge was breaking these restrictions because absolutely everyone did, including the politicians. Remember Jason Kenney and some of his ministers up on the roof of the Sky Palace here in Alberta during a lockdown, breaking, we did a count on it. They broke something, almost 20 odd regulations and several laws, their own COVID lockdown stuff. This was happening all over the place. So I think it's fair game if we did it. Probably a little more dicey if you're part of the Law Society, but hardly illegal. Well, John Carpe over Christmas was contacted by Calgary Police Services as a warrant had been put out for his arrest in Manitoba for obstruction of justice. He turns himself in. He spent a night in jail over Christmas. Bizarre stuff. Nigel, do you think? I know you're not a lawyer. You're not a cop, but this seems to be probably bending the definition of obstruction of justice to an extraordinary degree.
Because I am not a lawyer, I am not going to say yes or no to that. I do not know exactly where the line in obstruction of justice falls. I do know that judges would be quite naturally intimidated by somebody putting a tail on them. You could expect that. That was a consideration, I guess, that John decided to ignore at the time. But I can absolutely understand his frustration that somebody who he believed, and again, I don't know whether the facts support his belief or not, but somebody that he believed was flouting the COVID regulations was going to be passing judgment on his on a case that he was active in. Yeah, you kind of would like to know for sure. So I get the motivation. I think it was an error of judgment, but a very understandable one. Whether or not it was whether it can be called obstruction of justice, I guess will be determined by the very justice system that he didn't trust in the first place. But I tend to, without getting ahead of ourselves to the next segment on Jordan Peterson, I do see a bit of a pattern here. First of all, the very timing of his arrest at Christmas,
Mhm.
December the 30th, actually. What was that about? Was that a little bit like arriving outside Roger Stone's house at 4 o'clock in the morning with CNN and, like the shock, the awe, the horror, the sort of the equivalent of the perp walk, where win or lose, they still got a picture of you in handcuffs. Well, I don't know whether he had handcuffs applied to him, but
I would imagine that he spent the night in jail.
yeah.
There's violent criminals who do not spend the night in jail.
Right. So whether he did or he didn't, he certainly had an uncomfortable time. And as he himself says privately, that nothing like perhaps what happened to Tamara Litch or some of the pastors who were who have been arrested. But this was deliberate. Part of the punishment here is that you get your Christmas arrangements seriously disrupted. So what's the message here? And when you see some other the experts in science being challenged by government and by their professional associations, always the message is, if you are part of this way of thinking that we often give voice to, then you are suspect, and you need to be. If we can't get you one way, we'll get you another. So I'm with John on this one.
So, Cory, again, none of us are lawyers here, but I think we have a basic understanding of the law here. Obstruction of justice would be attempting, I don't have the definition in front of me, but it's attempting to obstruct the proper workings of the legal system, ensuring justice. That's normally witness tampering of a kind, or it's threatening a judge. I can understand having a tail on you is not nice, but putting a tail on someone in Canada is not illegal. I can hire a PI and follow you around and see where you go for dinner. It'd be a very improper thing to do. I have a feeling you'd probably quit here pretty quick when you figured it out. But it's not an illegal thing to do. And governments do it all the time when they have a suspicion of something. It seems like an issue better dealt with by the Law Society, where it was being dealt with, and Carpe's been cooperating, than the legal system. Do you think there maybe?
I think there's a few things to unpack. Like, to start with, when that first broke, it was, again, I like John, and he's done excellent work. I mean, their organization has been standing up for people that really needed an advocate and doing a great job with it. So it was like, it was a what were you thinking moment when I read it. Like, John, man, I mean, it is a fine line, and I guess that's where the courts will decide it. But if you or I send somebody to tell a judge it's legal, unless we're in the midst of an active case where that judge is presiding on it, and then you got a bit of a different thing going on. What if, I'm just going down the speculative road here, the person you had tailing them was Big Guido, who's scary and intimidating looking, and every time the judge turns around, you see this thug peeking.
Well, that I would take as
I'm just saying the interpretations that could come from this could be negative.
Guido is racist.
Yeah, and I think part of it too is we can see the intent that Guido is a
racist. Let's say.
You know what?
Sorry about that, Mario.
You know what? I'm sorry. When it comes to the Italians and Irish, racism is still funny. Yes, I'm sorry.
I'm using it where I can get away with it.
Anti-Italian and Irish racism is still acceptable in my book. It's just funny.
I don't think they'll be able to find intent, because I don't think that's what the intention of Mr. Carpe was. As you said, he was trying to see if he could find a double standard in practice and expose that. But it was, I think all agree. They would have to prove
intent, and I have a hard time imagining they put Polly as a tail to physically be seen. I doubt that's what it was.
Yeah, so it was ill-advised, but I mean, this is just my guess as a non-lawyer as well. I don't think they're going to find a criminal finding in the end, but we know how the system can be used. Where's the process is the punishment, and the timing is very questionable. As you said, let's just go into the holiday season and have, he turned himself in, I believe, when he found out the warrant was out, but have him locked up for an evening with something like that. So far after the fact of when it happened, it seems like maybe there's some intimidation coming from the other side too now. And as you said, maybe this is more of a Law Society thing, but this is a vindictive state that I find it hard to believe there's not some of the motivation also is that Mr. Carpe has been such a thorn in their side over a lot of the things for this many years. This is their way of slapping back, and that's distressing in itself.
a concern for me as well is a potential conflict of interest of whatever judge presides. I have no idea of I doubt the judge has even been assigned that'll deal with this case. And while I think judges genuinely try to be objective, if the judge rules for John Carpe here and against the prosecution, the judge is then saying it's okay then legally for people to tail me personally. And that's an inevitable conflict of interest, and it's impossible to find a judge who wouldn't, because this would apply to all judges. So I can't help but fear that that's got to creep into it a bit, that ruling not guilty in this case is giving people license to tail yourself. And I certainly wouldn't like being tailed. Okay. Well, speaking of weird justice outside of the courts, Jordan Peterson has been ordered to undergo some kind of sensitivity social media training because he has hurt some feelings. So the Ontario College of Psychologists has demanded, well, here is Jordan Peterson's tweet. The Ontario College of Psychologists has demanded I submit myself to mandatory social media communications retraining with their experts for, among other crimes, retweeting Pierre Poilievre and criticizing Justin Trudeau and his political allies. Now, we haven't seen a statement from the Ontario College of Psychologists. Now, just for background, the Ontario College of Psychologists is a government body. It is the professional governing body of Ontario psychologists, but these colleges are endowed by various provincial governments with certain quasi-judicial powers. They can strip you of your license and forbid you from practicing in an area. They can fine you. They can censure you. In some ways, they're both a prosecution and a court for issues within a given profession. Same would go for dentists, plumbers, and electricians. There's colleges or professional associations for all of these things. So Peterson, he's been accused of harming people. He added that none of the complainants are past or present clients or are acquainted with him in any way. And he's been told that he has to take this social media sort of sensitivity training with reports documenting his progress, and if he objects, he will face an in-person tribunal that will potentially suspend or revoke his license to practice as a clinical psychologist. Pretty extreme stuff. Now, Corey, we've only heard from Peterson here. We haven't seen the case presented against him by the Ontario College of Psychologists. Maybe Jordan Peterson has done something very bad. Is this serious in any way, or is this just hey, we need to respond to these grievances?
It's very serious because it'll put a chill on any political discourse from anybody in a governed profession like that. I mean, it depends, I guess, what they've got on the list, but I would presume there better be something more that applies to the practice of a psychologist. Is he counseling patients incorrectly? Is he, giving destructive advice? Is he taking advantages of his position as a psychologist? And we've seen no evidence of that. We're seeing that, well, we don't like the political stance you're taking, and we're going to put your profession at risk due to that. I don't know how much impact that would necessarily have on Mr. Peterson, because I mean he's certainly doing well enough as an author and a speaker. And
I don't think he's practicing very much.
Yeah, I don't know anyhow, but it's certainly a point of principle. And the other worry again is we have thousands and thousands of psychologists out there and people with other professional organizations that they're beholden to, that they might be afraid of tweeting a political view or saying something that might be contrary to the mainstream because their organization will crack down on them. This could set a very, very bad precedent.
Well, the other thing there, Corey, too, is that if they say that he did something bad, they effectively cancel him. That gives the Googles, the YouTubes, the Twitters of this world, well, maybe not Twitter at the moment, but Google the excuse to close him down. Yeah. And then it wouldn't be just that he can't practice, he'd be off the circuit as well. So
it could hinder
this is
him,
extremely serious.
This has got hints to me of the probably the most famous human rights commission or tribunal case in Canadian history, which involved the Western Standard in its first form, roughly circa 2005, 6, 7. The Western Standard was the only publication in Canada that ran the famous Muhammad cartoons, Danish Muhammad cartoons that had triggered riots and quite a few deaths worldwide. And all the media were talking about it, but none of them would show people what they were so upset about. I remember I opened the Western Standard, and it was a magazine, saw these cartoons, and I didn't even think they were particularly funny. They were rude towards the Islamic prophet Muhammad, but certainly pale in comparison to some of the things I've seen cartoons of Jesus or anything like that, or Moses and things like that. But this became this big. The Western Standard at the time turned it into a platform. Ezra Levant was publisher at the time, and it became this big national issue, and it almost brought down the Human Rights Commissions. It was that bad. Human Rights Commissions tried to dismiss the case when it became that bad because they didn't want it to get to a constitutional challenge in the real courts. And the Western Standard's lawyers at the time said, no, we want to go to court. We want to be found guilty so we can go to courts. But it didn't eventually get there. I think I feel like the Ontario College of Psychologists has picked a fight they can't win. Because even if they strip them of these things, I think it'll make the general, these kinds of professional associations, be they medical doctors, surgeons, and that kind of thing, I think it's going to make them look so petty. I think it's going to damage the profession because Jordan Peterson is a nobody. He's one of the biggest personalities on the planet right now. I don't think he's cancelable. What do you think, Nigel? Do you think these guys are going to come to regret this?
I recall that under former management, Twitter successfully delisted the President of the United States. Mm-hmm. So I don't subscribe to the view that towering celebrity is a protection against being canceled.
No, but it was bad for the brand of Twitter. Twitter lost a ton of Republicans, which, half the United States, it overly politicized Twitter to the point where it couldn't be ignored anymore. And while Trump was off, what didn't protect him, it very badly damaged the brand of Twitter and helped with some of the motivation for its eventual hostile corporate takeover by Elon Musk. I feel like, I doubt there'll be a hostile corporate takeover of the Ontario College of Psychologists, but I don't know. My gut tells me this is a battle they can't win if they convict him or not.
I think they can, because first of all, they have the layer of government over them. You can change the composition of the college, just carry on, but in the end, they are not accountable. See, when you go to a Human Rights Commission, you can win or you can lose, but the thing can go forward into the justice system. It's usually as a matter of process after that to see whether the rules were fairly applied, but there is another level of appeal, which in the case that you are talking about could very well have been their undoing.
Well, I think I'm going to have to look more into this, but I have a feeling you can actually appeal to a proper court. I think the Ontario Superior Court, Alberta's equivalent to the Court of King's Bench now. You might be able to appeal these. I'm not positive.
I think there is a larger issue here, and that is the way in which so many experts, Jordan Peterson is an expert, so are some doctors who challenge the standard narrative of COVID. But when they do so, they're respected members of the community right up until the time that they challenge the orthodoxy. Then they become part of the alt-right. Then they're there with Alex Jones and Nigel Hannaford. They become bad people overnight because they challenge the orthodoxy and they lose all their defenses. And it is these kinds of organizations, the college, the appointed body. Guess how you get appointed? Not by being an iconoclast, not by being somebody who will challenge the orthodoxies. You get in there because you fit. You think the right things. And then you've got there to make sure everybody else thinks the right things. So this has become quite a lot bigger than what it was 17 years ago, which is why I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about this case, but I don't think it's a slam dunk for Jordan Peterson.
What's your take, Corey? Do you think this is a no-win for the College of Psychologists? Regardless of what they do, he doesn't need to practice at this point. He's mostly media personality and a writer.
And there could be just two losers in that Peterson gets punted from his profession. Even if other platforms deplatform, again, he's still got the speaking circuit. He's got ways around. It would harm the reach, but it wouldn't cancel him altogether. I think he is a little too big to fully cancel, but you can harm him. But as Nigel was saying too, these institutions, well, again, they don't care. They're not going to see a consequence for it. The college is still going to be there, and they can still pressure other members. That's what I'm saying. I'm worried more for the other members who can't sustain such pressures like Mr. Peterson.
So you repeated the Ezra Levant line just now about the punishment is the process. You may be all kinds of ballsy, but in the end, do you really want the hassle? That's what they do.
Yeah, and they can abuse you until you're dead.
So I want to pick up on your point, Nigel, just about the silencing of people, experts in general that disagree with whatever the mainstream government narrative is on an issue. We've seen this all over the place, particularly in the more medical professions. We have Dr. Nagasi in Alberta here, suspended, had his medical license suspended because he prescribed things like ivermectin, which YouTube and Facebook should know are absolutely terrible and have no merit whatsoever. We would never recommend anyone do that if you're watching YouTube and Facebook. But doctors who have spoken up against lockdowns in Ontario and Alberta, there's been a good number of prominent cases, and some others across the rest of Canada. But people in the medical profession and various other adjacent professions have already had their right to practice revoked by these quasi-government bodies because they went against the narrative. And sometimes they've had views, and I'm like, I'm not sure. But they weren't harmful views. They weren't hurting anybody. They were just against the mainstream. And you just wouldn't, until 2 years ago, you'd see a doctor says, well, I think that this, they might publicly say, I think this procedure is promised, and we should look into performing this procedure. What was it? There was something called liberation therapy. It was, I forget what it is, something involving cancer or something. It's controversial in the medical community. I know nothing about the merits of either side. But doctors had a public debate about it, and that was considered normal. It was okay. But now anyone speaks against, they're gone. They're silenced. And Jordan Peterson, I don't think they can silence, but I think they can silence the overwhelming supermajority of doctors, psychologists, and anyone else, because Jordan Peterson's probably got the biggest podium of anyone in Canada right now.
Yeah, well, I think they can. If you're let's say you're a doctor, you're 55 years old, and you've got 10 years to go, and the kids aren't through school yet, and the mortgage isn't quite paid, and you haven't quite got the ref set up the way you want it, you've got a lot to lose. And so the chances that somebody is going to be brave and take on the establishment under those circumstances is very, very much reduced. But when I'm saying there's something wider going on here, you may recall that a couple of weeks ago we were talking about the University of Calgary and how they had introduced an affirmative action, racially discriminatory hiring policy.
Yeah,
when we went into
the racial quota system.
Yeah, when we went into that a little further, we found that one of the things that was driving that was that if they did not have these policies in place, when their researchers went to the granting agencies for funds, they wouldn't get them because their university was not playing the game the way that the government wanted the game played. And the way that the government wants the game played with Jordan Peterson, and which they are attempting to enforce through the college, is that you don't criticize the prime minister and you don't support the opposition. These are two particular instances that he has named and we have named in this story. They want to control what you think and what you do. And by the way, if you have a policy of locking down the country, you don't want people saying, well, this could be wrong. The whole idea of free speech, and you can say what you like, is rapidly going down the plug hole.
Well, let's turn from authoritarian to insanity. I'm going to come to you first on this one, Corey. So a Texas father.
Insanity expert?
Oh, I don't think he is.
Yeah, that's you're Western Standard's resident expert on insanity. A Texas father has lost custody over his 7-year-old son, which now clears the way for the mother to transition this 7-year-old boy from male to female. The mother had asked the court to force the father to call their son by his new female name, Luna. It's not even just a female name, it's a hippie name, for God's sakes. And not allow any children around Luna who did not use his female name and his female pronouns. This is something she petitioned the court for. She said, signing up Luna as James is the child's real name, signing up Luna as James for any activities or taking James or James's friends or using male pronouns related to Luna at any activities at home. They have those things banned. Allowing children to remain in the presence of anyone who is not calling her Luna, her chosen name, and not using her female pronouns to prefer, and otherwise not affirming the name Luna. Just literally, this child would have the court, she petitioned the court, I'm not sure if the court granted that part, but essentially no one could legally be around Luna who does not consider Luna. This all came because the mother considered James, her boy, to be a girl after he asked for a girl's toy from McDonald's and said he wanted one of the female characters from Disney's Frozen. And now, so now he's lost the custody battle, and this opens up the way for her plan to chemically castrate this boy. Cory, I have nowhere to start, so I'm just going to throw it to you.
Sure. A bit to correct, though. Her plan is to move on to, puberty blockers and essentially chemical castration, but that will be later.
Yes, there's some psychological
Texas does have laws. Actually, you can't do that to a minor, but that's her intent once the child ages. She's making that quite clear that she wants to have the irreversible path. And what they're talking about now is calling socially transitioning, which is, ordering everybody around the young boy to fill the fantasy that it's a girl, and participate in the delusion on behalf of the mother. And I tell you, if anybody's crazy in this, it's the mother. I'm just sick to death of this. It's a mother who's got an issue. It's, as I said on my show earlier, I think it's like a version of Munchausen by proxy. You're not making your child sick to gather attention, but you're making a claim that now this is a 7-year-old who identifies. Come on, it's a kid. It's a kid. Every hour they identify something else. He'll want to be a firefighter next week, and he'll want to be
a girl plays with a lightsaber and a truck. She's not. That doesn't make her a boy.
And it's going to socially damage this child and the children around him when you're forcing these bizarre rules that even children can see through. A boy is a boy. A girl is a girl. When the child reaches 18, if he or she wants to transition to whatever the hell, go to town. But there's no way a child of that age. It's just staggering to think a judge would indulge this. And as you said, particularly in Texas. And now that the father has lost contact to be able to at least try to be a sane force in this child's life.
So Nigel, one of the most shocking parts of this, because so much of it's shocking, is that this came from the Supreme Court of Texas. I don't think there's been a Democrat governing Texas for,
Not in your lifetime.
Probably since the 60s,
Right.
maybe 70s. I mean, there used to be different kinds of Democrats that weren't woke and hardcore left. But there hasn't been a left-wing kind of woke governor of Texas, possibly ever. I know there's some very blue pockets in Austin and whatnot, but at the statewide level, they consistently elect Republicans, and normally fairly rigorous Republicans at that. But for this to come from Texas, why do you think that could be coming from the Texas Supreme Court? And then secondly, what do you think the danger is of contagion of this coming to Canada?
Well, I think we can deal with those two in one answer. The danger of contagion is already manifest. It's here. When I was preparing for this conversation, went into the books and onto the internet, and there's a case in BC right now. In fact, I think the BC case came first, so maybe it's a contagion that's heading down from Canada to Texas. But whichever came first, that particular chicken or that particular egg, this is everywhere. It's in Great Britain. It's in Europe. It's and it's in,
how English of you to say those are different things.
Well,
very, very English of you. Well done.
That's habit dies hard. There was a wonderful headline in the Times when there was a fog in the channel, and the headline was "Fog in Channel, Europe cut off." So
yeah.
I guess I grew up in that era.
Mm-hmm.
But getting back to this particular insanity, it's hard to put a finger on how much of this is going on and where it's going on. Because the second that an outraged father steps forth and says, "This is what they're trying to do to my son," that right there proves that he's an unfit father, shouldn't be given custody because he just doesn't understand these things. And therefore, the caring mother who will see through the transition gently is the one who should look after him. So guess what? Not many men step forward and say, "Look what they're doing to my kid." And just asking around people who I'll give him a call out. Jonathan Van Maren, you're probably aware of his writings. He's done a lot of work on this. And this is not one or two cases. There's a bit of this going around, and you don't hear about it because of that very thing. The fathers are frightened to death to engage with it because they could lose all custody of their son.
Yeah, there are transgender people. It's a real thing. And, maybe it starts earlier for some kids than for others. But the numbers we're seeing here, I mean, like there's some families where a parent will claim that they have, 2 or 3 transgendered children. And it is, I don't want to be unscientific and say it's impossible, but it is mathematically improbable in the extreme that this would be the case. And I'm just not sure, what is the psychological phenomenon driving this, where you've got some parents, maybe it's a combination, I think, of well-meaning, caring, empathetic mothers, but also combined with there's a social virtue signaling of look publicly how caring, how progressive and forward-looking I am, that you'd have some parents push this on their own children. And it's not universal, but it seems to come disproportionately from the mother.
Yeah, it does. 50 years ago, when I was sort of starting to think about how to raise children, the advice that I got, the books I read, and everything that was affirmed by people who claimed to know, said, look, the kids come along, a little boy, a little girl. Sometimes they go through a period of confusion as they approach and pass through puberty, but just get them through it and everything settles itself. Now, there may be some who didn't get settled out, but by and large, that seemed to work out and seemed to be validated by experience. But I think what's happened here now is that in the decades since, where we have seen social change to the point where I think sometimes we don't even understand what it means to be a human being anymore, that all of the things that seem like common sense and very obvious are just out of the window, and people have no conception of what they're playing with.
Yeah. Cory, there are different legal systems. And so precedent in Texas is not supposed to set legal precedent in Alberta and vice versa. But the courts don't seem to think that way. They try to find more local precedent. But, when the courts make a move one way, at least when it's in a so-called progressive direction, they pick up the cue and they'll find a reason to go there. Or maybe we're just completely missing this, that this was just a custody battle. But I can't imagine, that, and as a default in a custody battle, if parents are fighting over sole custody, the default is the mother. And there's some decent reasons for that sometimes, I guess. But in this case, she's actively harming a child. This is child abuse. This woman is a child abuser. She can sue me if she wants. This is child abuse.
I said that earlier today on my show too. That's exactly what I called it.
How are the court? I mean, at what point are we able to? Is the answer to this maybe labeling this kind of thing where you have, at least in cases of unjustified transitioning, I think to be considered child abuse?
It's only going to get worse until we've gone through a generation, and then we suddenly get all the damaged children who've grown up and looking back and saying, "Look what you did to me." Yeah. I wish I had to research it. It's come to me. There's a Twitter account from a young lady in the States. It's fantastic. She was convinced she was a man. She had a double mastectomy. She took puberty blockers and has since reconsidered. One of the tweets she put out recently was saying, if I'd have been born 10 years earlier, I'd still have breasts today and be able to have children. The pursuit of some of this transitioning, and as we said, there really are trans people, but I mean, with the transition as an adult, when you're much more clear on it, these irreversible courses of puberty blockers, mastectomies, chemical castration, they're going to come with grave consequences when these children grow up, and it's going to come back after their parents. I think they're going to come back after the courts, but there's going to be a whole lot of damage done in the meantime while these ludicrous rulings continue.
It's a crime against the generation.
You know, we should give a call out to our columnist, Linda Slobodian, who wrote on this very thing a couple of months ago, and she detailed the story of a person who she gave her name, Sarah. She started as a woman, went the man route, came back again. When she was going in the direction of transitioning, they couldn't have done more for her. The whole operation was covered by the national health, by the state. When she decided she'd made a horrible mistake, it cost her $60,000 to get back to being a man. So, meanwhile, Linda noted that a 2019 Canadian Health Survey on children and youth studied 6,800 adolescents aged 15 to 17, and I think it was something like up to 40% of them had either had suicidal thoughts or attempts because of the way they were, because of they're just the horrible mental confusion caused by all of this thing. So there is a lot out there to be concerned about. But it's so unfair to the kids who are led into this. They've only got to want to look at a pretty toy or something, and all of a sudden there's a counselor saying, "Well, we can fix this for you. You know, you could become a girl."
Well, maybe those are some psychologists that should be getting a real visit from the College of Psychologists for harming people.
It'll never happen.
I'm getting worked up, but I feel like there's got to be ways to accommodate the genuinely trans people who are on maybe an inevitable, they have a destiny to be, they're on a path to it. But these people playing these games with kids, they're child abusers, and it's time it becomes a crime. We got to do something about it.
They've overshot. You know, there was a lot of abuse. I mean, it wasn't that long ago when a gay child could deal with a lot of abuse from family, from friends, from, you know, old school psychologists who would tell them you had a mental disorder and you must be straight. But I think they've overcompensated to the point where we have to accommodate particularly to the point of whimsical, with 5 and 7 year olds. And again, it's not a matter of sexual identity. Now we're talking about physiologically changing the children, irreversible surgeries.
You know, a lot of gay people aren't even in favor of this.
No,
this is not like this is something that fell out of the.
Well, actually, a lot of it. I know people in the gay community. They hate that word. They. So there is no they.
Geez, we're going to be canceled.
There is no
next
they.
week.
They're individuals, but many gay people I know. They really hate this stuff because a lot of it's saying kids who are probably very possibly just gay or lesbian, they're being told, oh, no, you're not gay. You're just straight and trans. And this stuff is just confusing the shit out of little kids. And we're totally going to get banned on YouTube and Facebook on this one. Whatever. You know what? We're just going to do it on this one. Oh, you know what? YouTube and Facebook censors. I don't believe anything that I or anyone has said here. I disavow it all. There you go. Yeah. Okay, we're probably still getting banned, but I did my best. All right, gentlemen, I'm all worked up now. I gotta get off before I say something that gets us permanently banned. Thank you for joining me, though.
Nico's got the volume over there.
Okay, and he's got the bleeper button. We'll see how heavily he uses it. Thank you all very much for joining us. If you're not yet a member of the Western Standard, please go to westernstandard.news right now. Click on membership. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year to get you unlimited access through our paywall to all Western Standard content. We refuse to take government bailouts, and we need you to support us. Without you, without our sponsors, there'd be no Western Standard, and you just have to watch a CBC and read the Toronto Star. So if you don't want to do that, you got to become a member. Thank you very much for joining us. Happy New Year again, and God bless.
Here's a quick look at commodity prices in Lethbridge today. Cash barley is down another $4 at $4.43. Feed wheat is down $3 at $4.45, and corn is down $7 at $4.44 per metric ton. In the milling wheat markets, March Minneapolis futures dropped 12 3/4 cents to 906.5 per bushel, with local hard red spring bid for Jan-Feb movement at 11.55 per bushel. Looking at canola, nearby futures are lower $1.40 at 870.20 per ton, with delivered values for February movement at 19.50 per bushel. In the pulse markets, nearby red lentils are trading at 32.5 cents per pound, and yellow peas are higher 25 cents at $13 per bushel. And in the cattle markets, February live cattle added 62.5 cents at 157.48 per 100 weight. For more information on pricing or picked up options, give me a call, 403-394-1711. I'm Matt Busicum at Marketplace Commodities. Accurate real-time marketing information and pricing options.
Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Without the CSSA, our gun rights would have been taken long ago. These guys are on the front lines helping to draft smart and intelligent firearms regulations and legislation in Canada, and more importantly, educating the public about how we keep guns out of the hands of the wrong people. We've become a member. It's absolutely worth every penny.
It takes work to run this place. For my mental wellness, I try to exercise more days than I don't. And now, my husband is joining us too, and we've all seen the difference. And if I need more support, I call 211.
You can become a Western Standard member for just $10 a month or $99